Why was she the only one not laughing? The sound of mockery carried through the sterile training hall like static. Young voices, raw, confident, untested, bounced off the metal and concrete. The laughter wasn't cruel in the way true cruelty is. It was worse than that. It was ignorant, loud, unaware. They called her Den Mother. "Ma'am, are you lost?" one of them jeered. "The knitting club meets on Tuesdays." More laughter, a wave of arrogance from men who hadn't yet learned the difference between training and war, between pretending to be dangerous and being it. She stood alone. A woman in her late 30s, dressed not in uniform but in a gray long-sleeved shirt and worn cargo pants. Her boots were scuffed, her hair tied back in a no-nonsense knot. Nothing about her invited attention, nothing about her demanded respect. And yet, something about her silence changed the air. While they mocked, she didn't react. Not a twitch, not a blink. Her eyes, dark, steady, moved slowly across the massive kill house before them, taking in every angle, every reflection of light, every uneven tile that might conceal a pressure plate. She wasn't standing still. She was ready. The kind of readiness that comes from years spent on the edge of consequence. Up in the control booth, behind reinforced glass, a general watched her through the glow of monitors. His name was Marcus Thorne. He'd seen thousands of soldiers in his 30 years, young, old, fearless, broken. But there was something in the way this woman carried herself that made the back of his neck tighten. He leaned forward, narrowed his eyes. He knew that stance. Relaxed knees, shoulders loose, hands hanging naturally at her sides but placed just right, close enough to move fast, far enough to seem casual. That wasn't the posture of a logistics consultant. That was a combat stance. The kind that comes from muscle memory, not training manuals. Down on the floor, the drill instructor strutted like a performer before his audience. Staff Sergeant Riggs, mid-40s, loud voice, square jaw, all show. He mistook volume for authority, cruelty for discipline. His men loved him for it. "Listen up, ladies," he barked, puffing his chest. "This here is Ms. Anya Sharma. She's from Logistics Command. Here to observe your readiness evaluation. You know, one of those clipboard types sent to make sure you're not using too many pencils." Laughter again, louder this time. One recruit stood a little taller than the rest, his smile sharp and confident. Private Kade Jennings, top of his class, best shot on base, every drill instructor's favorite name on the leaderboard. He carried himself like he'd already earned a war story. To him, Anya Sharma was a prop, a soft civilian who'd wandered into the wrong room. He smirked. "Don't worry, ma'am," he said. "We'll keep the noise down for you." She didn't answer. Her expression didn't change. But there was something in her eyes, an old, quiet sadness, the kind that says she's seen too much to be impressed. General Thorne felt it too. He'd seen that expression on men who came home but never really left the battlefield. He whispered to himself, "Who are you?" The instructor clapped his hands. "All right, hotshots, dynamic entry drill. Standard room clear under 4 seconds. Jennings, show the lady how it's done." Jennings grinned, stepping forward with his M4 training rifle. It gleamed under the lights. The recruits straightened, eager to watch their champion. Anya's gaze shifted slightly to the weapon. Her eyes followed every detail. The angle of the grip, the tension in Jennings's arms, the placement of his feet. Her mind was already mapping the scene, calculating. Jennings didn't notice. He raised the rifle, sighted the doorframe. Smooth, confident. "Objective," Riggs said proudly. "Neutralize all hostiles in under 4 seconds. Record's 38. You think you could do that with your clipboard, ma'am?" More laughter. Still, she said nothing. Jennings exhaled, ready. And then, in a moment that froze every muscle in the room, he turned. Not toward the door. Toward her. The barrel of the rifle rose, until the red dot rested right between her eyes. Boom, he said softly, smirking. Hostile administrator neutralized. The laughter died instantly. Even the boldest recruit felt it. Something sacred had just been broken. Riggs's face hardened, not out of concern for the woman, but because it made him look bad. Jennings, what the hell do you think you're doing? But the damage was done. The room went silent. Up in the control booth, General Thorne shot to his feet. His hand slammed the intercom switch, but he didn't press it. Something told him to wait. Something told him this wasn't over. Because down on the floor, Anya Sharma had just moved. Not much, just a shift of weight, a small drop in her center of gravity, a subtle flicker in her eyes like a shutter opening. And in that instant, the world seemed to pause. The hum of the fluorescent lights dimmed. Every recruit felt the change but couldn't explain it. The air grew heavy. Jennings's smirk faltered. He expected fear, a flinch, anything, but her face stayed calm, unblinking. She was looking at him, not as a threat, not as a person, but as a problem. And she was very, very good at solving problems. Her movement was almost invisible, a blur of controlled energy, one seamless motion made of instinct, not thought. Before anyone understood what was happening, Jennings's rifle was gone. He was on the floor, gasping pain shooting through his arm. Anya stood above him, his rifle now in her hands. It had taken less than half a second. No wasted motion, no aggression, just the quiet, terrifying efficiency of someone who had done this before for real. Riggs froze, the recruit stared wide-eyed. Jennings clutched his wrist. His mind couldn't process what had just happened. And Anya. She didn't gloat, didn't speak. She just turned, lifted the weapon, and faced the training bay's simulation area. Targets popped up automatically, 5 in total. Mannequins wired to move, to simulate a live urban combat scenario. She moved before anyone could breathe. Tap, tap, 2 round center mass. Tap, tap, headshots left and right. A roll to one knee, precision, fluidity, breath control, tap. Hostage taker neutralized. 31 seconds. When the air gun hissed empty, the silence that followed was total. Every recruit stood frozen. The room felt like a church after the sermon of something divine and terrifying. Jennings's chest rose and fell. Riggs's face was pale. And up in the control booth, General Thorne slowly lowered his hand from the intercom. He'd seen that movement before, on a grainy feed years ago, in a night raid over a mountain range the world never knew about. It was her. The ghost. The one they'd whispered about in Delta circles. He smiled, a grim, knowing smile. Down below, Anya set the rifle gently on a table, cleared it, removed the air cartridge, placed it neatly beside the magazine. Then she turned back to them, calm, composed, as if she'd just finished a routine drill. Her face didn't demand respect, it commanded it quietly. No one spoke. Not Riggs, not Jennings, not the recruits who'd mocked her minutes ago. Then came the sound of heavy boots descending the metal staircase. General Thorne stepped into the training bay. His presence cut through the silence like a blade. Every recruit snapped to attention. The general didn't look at them, he looked only at her. For a long moment they just stood there, 2 soldiers from different wars, different generations, connected by something wordless. Finally he spoke. I haven't seen a transition that clean since the Zagros Mountains. 9. The recruits glanced at one another, confused. Those words meant nothing to them, but everything to her. A flicker of recognition passed between them. Just a nod, nothing more. Thorne turned toward the wall monitor and entered a command. A personnel file appeared on the screen. At the top, SHARMA ANYA Master Sergeant retired. The recruits' faces drained of color. Delta Force, 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment D. The ghosts, the legends, the ones who didn't exist except in the stories instructors told in bars. Thorn began to read aloud. Silver star for valor, 3 bronze stars with valor device, 2 purple hearts, advanced urban combat instructor, Halo and HAHO jump master. Each word hit the recruits like a blow. They hadn't been mocking a civilian observer. They'd been mocking a living legend. Jennings looked at the floor, his wrist throbbing, shame burning through him hotter than the pain. The general turned back toward Anya, and then he saluted. A general, saluting a woman in civilian clothes. The recruits couldn't believe what they were seeing. "Master Sergeant Sharma," he said quietly, "it's an honor. Forgive the ignorance of these boys. They haven't yet learned the difference between a soldier and a warrior." She didn't smile. She just gave a small nod, the kind that says, "Lesson delivered." The silence that followed was holy. When she finally left the room, every bootstep sounded like the closing of a chapter none of them would ever forget. Jennings couldn't move. His world had shifted. Everything he thought he was broken apart in 31 seconds. But beneath the humiliation, something else stirred. A question. A new kind of fire. What would he do now? He didn't know it yet, but that question would become the foundation of his entire life. And the legend of that day, the story of the quiet professional who shattered arrogance with silence, was only beginning to spread. Why couldn't he sleep? The question gnawed at Kade Jennings long after the lights went out in the barracks. The laughter from earlier, the jokes, the swagger felt like echoes from another lifetime. Now when he closed his eyes, all he saw was her. The way she moved. The way she didn't move. The way the room fell silent when she was done. He replayed every second of it in his head, the flick of her wrist, the blur of motion that left him on the ground, gasping. 31 seconds. 5 targets. Not one wasted movement. It wasn't just skill, it was something else, something colder. Like she'd seen it all before. He rolled over on his bunk, staring at the ceiling. The air in the dorm was heavy, humid, filled with the faint smell of gun oil and sweat. Around him, the other recruits were quiet. No jokes now, no whispered bravado. Just the rustle of sheets and the sound of 100 minds replaying their own shame. They'd laughed at a legend. And he had pointed a rifle at her head. He crossed a line no soldier ever should. Not just the rules, but the line of respect. He didn't know which hurt more, the memory of her disarming him so effortlessly, or the calm look in her eyes when she walked past him like he wasn't even worth anger. He turned again, sleep wouldn't come. He could still hear her voice, quiet, even steady. "What will you do now?" He didn't understand it then. But those 5 words would change him forever. Morning came harsh. The bugle call felt sharper than usual, cutting through the hangover of humiliation. The recruits dressed in silence, pulling on their uniforms like armor against the memory of yesterday. Staff Sergeant Riggs didn't shout this time. He looked smaller, quieter, like the swagger had been stripped from him too. Even his commands felt mechanical. No jokes, no laughter. The events of Training Bay 7 had spread across the base overnight. Whispers traveled faster than bullets. By breakfast, everyone knew. The story was already growing wings. Some said she was CIA. Others claimed she once cleared a compound alone in Afghanistan. Someone said her name was used in training manuals, an example of perfect combat efficiency. Jennings sat alone, staring into his metal tray. The scrambled eggs had gone cold. He wasn't hungry. Across the mess hall he could feel eyes on him, some curious, some pitying. Others judging. He'd been the best. Now he was the fool who aimed his rifle at the ghost of Delta. The general hadn't punished him. That almost made it worse. He wanted the yelling, the demotion, the anger, but there was only silence. And that silence said more than words ever could. He left the hall early, walked out into the open air. The base stretched before him, barracks, motor pool, the dull metallic gleam of the kill house under the rising sun. Somewhere inside that maze of steel and echoes, she had rewritten the story of his life. He didn't know why, but he needed to see it again. He found himself standing at the edge of Training Bay 7, the same floor, the same walls, only now it felt sacred. Like walking into a place where something holy had happened. The targets had been reset, clean, untouched, but he could still see it, the blur of motion, the calm precision, the unspoken command. He picked up a training rifle from the rack. It felt heavier today. He tried to imagine her movements. The stance, the timing. The stillness before the storm. He exhaled. But the moment he raised the weapon, he knew he wasn't even close. That wasn't something you learned in a classroom. That was something you earned. He lowered the rifle, the weight of his own arrogance pressing down on him. For the first time in his life, he understood what humility felt like. From the observation booth, General Thorne watched silently. He'd expected the boy to come. Every recruit who'd been in that room had been changed, but this one, Jennings, had been broken in just the right way. Thorne saw the way he stood now, shoulders lower, movement slower. There was no swagger left. Only the quiet shame of someone who'd glimpsed the truth and couldn't unsee it. The general didn't smile. He'd been in this business too long to mistake shame for growth. But this was a start. He picked up his radio. "Riggs," he said evenly, "send Private Jennings to my office." Jennings arrived 10 minutes later, his uniform immaculate, his posture stiff. "Sir," he said, voice steady but small. Thorne didn't look up right away. He was staring at a folder on his desk, the one marked Sharma Anya. When he finally did, his eyes were calm, unreadable. "Sit." Jennings obeyed. Thorne leaned back in his chair. "You had quite a day yesterday." "Yes, sir." "You embarrassed your unit, disrespected a veteran, nearly broke a rule that could have ended your career." "Yes, sir." A long silence followed. Then Thorne said quietly, "Why did you do it?" Jennings hesitated, his throat tightened. "I thought she was no one, sir." Thorne's gaze didn't waver. "And now?" Jennings swallowed hard. "Now I know I was wrong." "Wrong about what?" He hesitated. "Everything." Thorne nodded slowly. "Good." He stood, walking toward the window. Outside, the training yard glowed with morning light. Recruits ran drills, shouting commands. He'd seen generations of them come and go, loud, eager, invincible. Most learned humility the hard way. Some never did. He turned back. "You saw her file?" "Yes, sir." "Do you know what those medals mean?" Jennings shook his head. "They mean she spent half her life doing things most people couldn't survive once," Thorne said quietly. "They mean she bled for people who never knew her name, and when she was done, she didn't write a book. She didn't chase fame. She disappeared, because that's what professionals do." Jennings listened, silent. Thorne stepped closer. "You think strength is about control, but it is. It's about restraint. That woman could have humiliated you publicly, destroyed you, but she didn't. She gave you something instead, a question. What will you do now?" Jennings's eyes flickered. "She left it with you," Thorne said. "I suggest you answer it." The general returned to his desk, dismissed. Jennings stood, saluted, "Sir." As he turned to leave, Thorne's voice stopped him. "One more thing." Jennings looked back. "She'll be on base for another week, finishing her report. If you're smart, you'll find a way to learn something from her." Jennings nodded once. And this time when he stepped outside, the sunlight felt different. It wasn't forgiveness. It was a second chance. He found her later that day, sitting alone in the courtyard behind the range. No uniform, no insignia, just a notebook on her lap and a half-empty mug of coffee beside her. She looked peaceful, detached, like a soldier who'd finally made peace with her ghosts. He stood there for a full minute, unsure if he should interrupt. Then finally he spoke. "Master Sergeant Sharma." Her eyes lifted slowly. For a moment she didn't recognize him, or maybe she did and chose not to show it. "Private. I wanted to apologize." She closed the notebook, set it aside. "You already did." "I don't think I did it right." She studied him quietly. The silence between them stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of assessment. "Why?" she asked. He blinked. "Ma'am. Why are you apologizing?" He hesitated. "Because I disrespected you, because I acted like—" "No," she interrupted softly. "Why do you need to apologize?" He frowned, unsure what she meant. "Is it for me," she continued, "or is it for you?" The question hit harder than any reprimand. He didn't answer. She looked down at her coffee, then back at him. "You made a mistake, Private. Everyone does. The question isn't about what you did wrong. It's what you do after. That's where character begins." He nodded, eyes low. She stood then, slinging her small backpack over one shoulder. "If you want to learn something from this, show me. Don't tell me." And with that she walked away. Jennings stood there for a long time, the wind carrying the faint echo of her words. "Show me." That night he stayed in the range long after lights out. Practicing, failing, practicing again. He replayed her movements over and over. How she shifted weight, how she breathed, how she aimed not with her eyes but with her stillness. The others eventually stopped asking what he was doing. They knew. Something had changed. The cocky recruit was gone. In his place stood someone quieter, focused. He didn't talk about it, didn't boast. He just worked. And every night when exhaustion set in, that voice returned. "What will you do now?" He was starting to find his answer. In the command office, General Thorne read Anya's report. It was clinical, precise, not a word wasted. Training protocols sufficient. Recommend focus on mental discipline, emotional control, and respect for operational history. Suggest inclusion of humility-based leadership seminars. He smiled faintly. Humility-based leadership. That was her way of saying, teach them respect. He looked out the window at the range below, where one lone figure was still training under the floodlights. Private Jennings. Thorne nodded to himself. Maybe the lesson had found its mark. Elsewhere in a quiet dorm room, Kade wiped sweat from his face and set the rifle down. His hands trembled, not from fatigue but from something else. Resolve. He understood now. What she'd done wasn't about proving herself. It was about showing what true control looked like. It wasn't about dominance. It was about discipline. She hadn't reacted because she didn't need to. Her silence wasn't weakness, it was power. And for the first time in his life, Kade wanted that kind of strength. He sat on the edge of his bunk, whispering to himself. Actions are what define you. Then he smiled, faint, tired but real. Tomorrow he'd start again. Not to beat her record, not to erase his mistake, but to become someone who no longer needed to prove anything. Someone who let his actions speak. What happens when ghosts refuse to stay buried? For Anya Sharma, they came quietly, never when she called for them, but always when the world was still. In the hush between breaths, in the echo of a slammed door, in the sound of a training rifle clicking empty. That night, long after the recruits had gone to sleep, she sat alone in her quarters, the single bulb above her bed humming softly. The air smelled faintly of gun oil and old paper. Her report lay, half-finished, on the desk, lines of neat, measured handwriting that said nothing about what really mattered. Recommend discipline reinforcement. Recommend instructor reevaluation. Recommend cultural reset. Words that meant nothing and everything. Her pen hovered, she hesitated. There were things she could never write down. Not because they were classified, but because they were hers. The kind of memories that don't fit into official language. She leaned back in her chair, eyes tracing the cracks in the ceiling. Somewhere in those patterns she saw them again, the faces of the men she couldn't save. The dust, the static of a radio gone silent, the scream she never let out. Zagros Mountains, 2009. The memory began like a film reel she couldn't stop. She was back there again, the air thin and sharp, wind howling over the peaks. A team of 6, all elite, all ghosts in name and function. They were hunting a man whose name would never appear in the news, but whose shadow had stretched across continents. Her voice echoed in her mind. Blue team, shift east 40 meters. Maintain calm silence until breach. A chorus of soft affirmatives. They trusted her implicitly. Back then she was Sergeant Sharma, the one who always had the plan, the one who never flinched. The quiet one who listened more than she spoke. Until everything went wrong. A sound, metal scraping rock. Then fire. A detonation that split the mountain. And in that single deafening second, her world turned to noise, smoke, and loss. She remembered crawling through shattered stone, lungs burning, ears ringing. The voice in her headset, barely audible, "We're hit, we're." Then static. She dragged 3 men out alive that night. 2 didn't make it. The third, her team leader, died in her arms before extraction. He looked at her, blood soaking his sleeve, and whispered, "Finish the job." She had. When she returned to base, her report was perfect. Precise, clinical. Not a single line betrayed the weight in her chest. They gave her a medal, she gave them a salute. And then she walked away. The present hummed back into focus. She blinked, realizing her coffee had gone cold. Her reflection in the window looked older than she remembered. Not by years. By ghosts. She picked up the pen again, writing the final line of the report. The standard must be enforced, even in silence. The next morning, Training Base 7 was alive again. The recruits moved differently now, quieter, more deliberate. Respect had replaced bravado. Even Riggs, stripped of his theatrics, kept his voice low. Jennings, though, stood out, not by command. By focus. He was no longer chasing validation. He was chasing discipline. He spent hours in the range, adjusting his breathing, his stance, his patience. When others grew tired, he kept going. He was no longer trying to impress anyone. He was trying to rebuild himself. The first time Anya saw him again, it was accidental. She was passing through the bay, clipboard in hand, when she heard the rhythmic hiss of training rounds. She stopped. Kade stood at the far end, alone. No audience. No instructor. Just repetition. She watched silently. He didn't notice her. His form was cleaner. His transition smoother. Still not perfect, but honest. And that mattered more than skill. When he finally paused to reload, she spoke. "Better." He turned, startled. "Ma'am, I didn't see you." "You weren't supposed to," she said simply. He lowered his weapon, breathing heavy. "I'm trying to fix what I broke." Anya stepped closer, studying the targets. Tight grouping, good control. She pointed to one that sat just off-center. "You flinched here." He nodded, frustrated. "Yeah, I lost focus." She met his eyes, then find it again. He straightened, nodding once. "Yes, ma'am." She turned to leave but paused. "You can stop calling me ma'am. I'm retired." He hesitated. "What should I call you then?" She looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. "Call me what I am," she said quietly. A reminder. That night the wind howled across the base. Thunder rolled in the distance, the kind that rattles windows and nerves alike. In her quarters, Anya couldn't sleep. Her mind was restless, flickering between past and present. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the faces of the men she lost in Zagros. She got up, pulled on her jacket, and stepped outside. Rain had begun to fall, cold and sharp, tapping against the concrete like static. She walked toward the training field, drawn by something she couldn't name. And there he was, Jennings, standing under the floodlights, soaked, training alone again. He fired, reloaded, fired again, each shot crisp, deliberate. He wasn't chasing records. He was chasing redemption. She stopped at the edge of the bay, watching him. For a long time, neither spoke. The rain fell harder. Lightning cracked, casting white fire across the sky. Finally, she said, "Why are you out here?" He didn't look back, "Because I don't deserve to stop yet." The answer caught her off guard. There was no arrogance left in him, only raw honesty. She stepped closer. "You think pain earns forgiveness?" He paused, lowering the rifle. "No, ma'am, I think effort earns change." For a moment, the rain was the only sound between them. She studied him, the young soldier who had once mocked her, now transformed by humility. And for the first time in years, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel. "Hope. Keep going," she said softly. Then she turned and walked away, her figure fading into the curtain of rain. Days passed. The base slowly settled into its new rhythm. But beneath the surface, something deeper was changing, an invisible shift in culture, in tone, in standard. Recruits who once shouted now spoke quietly. Drills that once felt like competition now carried intent. And though Anya never lectured, never instructed, her presence alone reshaped them. They called it the Sharma effect. No official title, just whispers. To be Sharmad meant to be humbled by competence. In the general's office, Thorne reviewed her report for the last time. She was leaving in 2 days. He tried to convince her to stay, officially, permanently, but she'd refused. "I've done my part," she said. "The rest is up to them." He understood. People like her never stayed long in one place. They carried their lessons like torches, lighting the path, then disappearing before anyone could thank them. He signed the final page, then added a note of his own. "Implement Sharma recommendations in all future training cycles." When he looked up again, she was standing in the doorway. "Permission to speak freely, sir." Thorne smiled faintly. "You always do." She stepped inside. "I wanted to thank you for not interfering that day." He nodded slowly. "You saw it coming." "I saw arrogance," she said, "and I knew the only cure for arrogance is reality." "You gave it to them," he said quietly. "Hard dose." She smirked, a rare, brief expression. "They'll recover." He studied her for a moment. "Do you ever miss it?" Her gaze drifted toward the window. The rain was lighter now, just mist across the glass. "Every day," she said softly, "and not at all." Thorne tilted his head. "Both." She nodded. "I miss the clarity, the purpose, but not the noise. Out there everything was simple. Here it's slower but heavier." He said nothing for a long time. Then, "They'll talk about you for years, you know." "I hope not." "Why?" "Because legends are stories people tell to avoid becoming better themselves," she said. "I'd rather they just work harder." Thorne smiled again, a glimmer of respect in his eyes. "You haven't changed." "I hope I have," she said. And with that she turned and left. That night, as the storm cleared, Jennings walked through the barracks in silence. His body ached, but his mind was still. He passed the training bay, pausing for just a moment. Inside, the lights were dim. The plaque hadn't been mounted yet, but he could still feel it, like her presence lingered there. He whispered to the empty room, Thank you. Then he walked on. He didn't see her again that night. But the next morning at dawn, she found him waiting near the gate as she prepared to leave. He stood at attention, not out of duty but out of respect. Permission to speak, ma'am. She stopped, adjusting her bag. Go ahead. I wanted to thank you. For what? For breaking me. A small smile tugged at her lips. I didn't break you, Private. I just showed you where the cracks were. He nodded. I won't forget. Good, she said, but don't worship it either. The lesson isn't about me. I know. She looked at him for a long moment, then extended her hand. He shook it, firm, steady, equal. Remember, she said, respect isn't about fear, it's about understanding. Yes, ma'am. Stop calling me ma'am. He smiled. Yes, reminder. Her smile deepened just slightly. Better. And with that, she turned toward the convoy that would take her away. Jennings stood there until the last glimpse of her gray shirt vanished behind the trucks. Something in him had changed forever. He didn't know it yet, but her departure wasn't the end. It was the beginning of everything that came after. That night, as the stars returned over the base, the whispers began again. A story spreading like wind through corridors and canteens. About a woman who walked into a room full of arrogance and left behind silence. About 31 seconds that changed an entire generation of soldiers. No one could agree on the details. Some said she was ex-Delta. Some said she wasn't human at all. But one thing remained constant. They all remembered her calm, her stillness, her power, and the phrase that became a quiet creed across the base. The standard is the standard. Why did silence suddenly feel heavier than noise? Weeks had passed since Anya Sharma's departure, but her absence filled the base more completely than her presence ever had. Every hallway, every firing lane, every echo of boots on concrete carried her ghost. It wasn't the haunting kind. It was the kind that reminds you, a silent checkpoint in the mind of everyone who'd witnessed what happened in Training Bay 7. Even the recruits who hadn't been there whispered her name like a code word for truth. The standard is the standard. No one wrote it on walls. No one made posters. They didn't have to. It lived in the way they moved now. Private Kade, Jennings stood in formation as the morning sun bled gold across the compound. He was quieter, leaner, sharper. His posture wasn't stiff from fear anymore. It was balanced from intent. When Staff Sergeant Riggs barked orders now, the sound fell flat. The swagger that had once made him magnetic now felt brittle. He'd been reassigned to administrative drills pending review. Everyone knew it, even if no one said it aloud. Leadership had shifted without ceremony. Thorne could see it from his office window. The young soldier who'd once mocked the quiet professional now was one in the making. He didn't laugh. He didn't posture. He just worked, steady, deliberate, consistent. The transformation fascinated the general. He'd seen arrogance break before, but rarely reform into humility this cleanly. Inside the training bay, Kade assembled a squad of rookies. They were new, fresh from boot camp, still smelling of starch and optimism. He'd been tasked with helping them run dynamic entry drills. Not as an instructor, just as a peer mentor. Still, when he spoke, they listened. Rule 1, he said, voice low. Noise doesn't equal confidence. Keep your breathing steady. Every move has purpose. You shout only when you must. They nodded, shifting nervously. He continued, packing slowly in front of them. Rule 2, never assume weakness. Ever. You don't know who's watching you or what they've lived through. One of the rookies frowned, like the Sharma story. Kade's eyes flicked toward the kill house wall, where faint marks of that day still remained. He didn't answer right away. Exactly like that, he said finally. The recruits exchanged looks. They'd all heard the legend, how a consultant dismantled arrogance with 31 seconds of perfection. But hearing it from him carried weight. He holstered his rifle. "We're not chasing records, we're chasing control. You'll understand someday." And then he stepped back, letting them move, guiding without commanding. It was a small thing, but Thorne, observing unseen from above, recognized it. Leadership earned, not assigned. That night the base felt different. Calmer. The tension that had once filled the barracks had dissolved into quiet purpose. Even laughter sounded cleaner, less about ego, more about camaraderie. Jennings sat alone at a table, cleaning a rifle. Not because he had to. Because it was a ritual now: precision, patience, presence. Across from him, a young recruit hesitated before sitting down. "Hey, Sarge, sorry, Private, you mind if I—" "Go ahead." The kid set his weapon down awkwardly. "They say you saw her up close. Is it true she was Delta?" Kade smiled faintly, eyes still on the weapon. "You don't need to know her file to learn her lesson." "But what was she like? I mean off record." Kade paused. A memory flickered. The rain, the stillness, her voice saying, "Show me." She was, he searched for the word, calm, the kind of calm that makes you realize how loud your life's been. The recruit frowned, not fully understanding. Kade didn't explain further. Some truths weren't meant to be handed out, they had to be lived into. Later, alone in his bunk, Kade pulled a small folded note from his locker. It was the evaluation summary Thorne had given him, handwritten, rare for the general. Potential: exceptional. Weakness: impulsive pride. Corrective path: discipline through quiet repetition. At the bottom, a single additional line in Thorne's handwriting. "Remember what she asked you." He'd underlined one word: now. That single word became his mantra. Months rolled into seasons. The base rotated new recruits, new instructors, new doctrine, but the echo of that moment endured. The photo appeared one morning on the main bulletin board. A still from the training footage, Anya in mid-kneel, rifle perfectly steady, eyes focused. Beneath it, the caption in clean black letters: Master Sergeant Anya Sharma, 31 seconds. The standard is the standard. No ceremony. No speech. Just a quiet installation, as if the base itself had decided to remember. Kade stood before it the day it went up. He didn't touch the frame, didn't smile. He simply nodded, a small gesture of acknowledgement to her, to the lesson, to the man he'd been. Around him, recruits stopped to stare. Some whispered. Most just looked. It wasn't a shrine, it was a mirror. A year later, Kade's uniform bore a new stripe. Corporal. He didn't celebrate. Promotions were just paper, unless you could live up to them. He spent that night alone on the range, marking targets under moonlight. As he worked, he caught a faint smell of rain and dust, so vivid it pulled him back to that first stormy night with her. He could almost hear her voice again. Respect isn't about fear, it's about understanding. He whispered to the empty field, "I understand now." He exhaled slowly, the way she taught him without words, and fired. Each round landed center mass, perfectly spaced. 31 seconds later, the magazine clicked empty. He lowered the rifle, smiling faintly. Not because he'd matched her time, he hadn't. But because for the first time, his shots had felt peaceful. That was new. Elsewhere, General Thorne sat in a dim office, reviewing personnel updates. He'd seen Jennings' name come up repeatedly in training reports. Exemplary conduct. Unusually calm under stress. Demonstrates leadership by quiet example. It made him think of Anya's report, the one she'd left on his desk the day she disappeared again. He still kept it in the top drawer. Her final line remained etched in his mind. Competence is the purest form of respect. He closed the file and leaned back, eyes on the plaque across the room. A small brass plate mounted beneath the base insignia. The SHARMA line, never assume. It wasn't just a phrase anymore. It had become doctrine. 2 years later. Combat Readiness Drill, Night Cycle. Fort Hendricks had evolved into one of the most disciplined training centers in the division. Jennings, now sergeant, stood beside the new batch of recruits under glaring floodlights. He watched them fidget, whisper, laugh the way he once had. It almost made him smile, almost. The instructor, an old friend of Thorne, handed him a data pad. "You're running this cycle, your design." Kade nodded, understood. "Any message for the new kids before we begin?" He looked at them, their bright eyes, the restless energy. For a moment, he saw himself in each one. Then he said quietly, "Don't mistake silence for weakness." The instructor smirked, "You sound like her." "Good," Kade said. "That means I'm learning." The drill began. Explosions of compressed air, simulated gunfire, flashing lights. But beneath the noise, Kade's commands were soft, measured. His soldiers responded without panic. Precision through calm. When the cycle ended, they had completed the scenario faster than any team before them, flawless, coordinated, silent. The instructor clapped once. "That's how it's done." Kade didn't beam with pride. He just said, "The standard's not mine, it's ours." Later that night, alone again on the range, he set his rifle down and looked toward the mountains in the distance. Storm clouds crawled along the horizon. He wondered where she was now. Rumor said she'd gone overseas, consulting on counterinsurgency programs. Others claimed she'd vanished entirely. Some said she'd died in some nameless place, doing what she'd always done, quiet work no one would ever read about. He hoped she was alive. He hoped she knew her legacy had taken root. He hoped she was at peace. The next day, he received a sealed envelope in the mailroom. No sender, no return address. Just his name in handwriting he didn't recognize but somehow did. Inside, a single sheet of paper. No letterhead. No signature. Just 4 words. "Still asking, keep building." He read it 3 times before realizing his hands were trembling. He folded it carefully, placed it in his breast pocket, and stood there a long moment, smiling through the quiet. She was out there, still watching, still teaching. Weeks later, Thorne gathered the senior instructors for an internal review. New doctrines, new recruits, same principles. When the discussion turned to leadership tone, one officer said, "Sir, we've noticed the younger NCOs rarely raise their voices. It's strange, but efficiency's up across the board." Thorne nodded, hiding his smile. "That's not strange," he said. "That's progress." Another instructor frowned. "What caused the shift?" Thorne's gaze drifted to the brass plaque on the wall. 31 seconds, he said quietly. "That's all it took." As the meeting adjourned, rain began to patter against the windows again. The smell of wet earth and metal filled the corridor. Thorne stood alone for a moment, remembering the day that started it all, the laughter, the arrogance, the silence that followed. He realized something profound. That leadership wasn't measured in rank or noise, but in the quiet weight of example. He whispered to himself, "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts." Outside, the rain thickened, the same way it had the night Anya watched a young soldier rebuild himself under stormlight. And somewhere far beyond Fort Hendricks, maybe across an ocean, maybe just a few miles away, a woman in a gray shirt looked up from her coffee, sensing, without knowing why, that her work was still alive. How do you live quietly when the world only remembers your noise? For Anya Sharma, peace never came with stillness. It came with motion, slow walks through unfamiliar cities, early morning coffees in places where no one knew her name, the sound of a crowd that didn't care who she used to be. She told herself she liked the anonymity. She told herself she'd earned it. And yet, every time a door slammed too hard or a car backfired in the distance, her body remembered the war before her mind did. Her muscles tensed, her breathing shortened. Ghost reflexes. Training that never left. She'd been retired for 3 years now. No uniform, no rank, no salutes. Just a small apartment 2 miles from the sea and a routine that looked ordinary from the outside, running at dawn, writing brief consulting reports for defense contractors, answering no calls she didn't initiate. But silence has its own weight. And sometimes, when it pressed too hard, she'd open the small metal box under her bed. Inside, a few folded photographs. Her old unit patch, a silver star she never wore, and one picture she always paused on, 6 figures in desert gear, faces half hidden behind dust and exhaustion. 5 alive. 1 missing forever. She touched the edge of the photo and whispered his name. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't grief. It was something harder to define, the kind of bond forged by survival and fractured by time. Then she closed the box again, sealing the past where it belonged. For a while, thousands of miles away, Fort Hendricks had changed. The base was no longer just another training installation. It was a crucible. Its recruits spoke differently, moved differently. There was a plaque on every wall now, "Never assume." Every instructor used the phrase like a compass point. The culture had evolved. Less shouting, more listening. Results spoke louder than rhetoric. And at the center of that quiet revolution stood one man, Sergeant Kade Jennings. He didn't think of himself as a leader, though his soldiers did. He thought of himself as a student of a lesson he was still learning. His unit was small, 6 soldiers, selected for advanced urban combat training. They called themselves Base 7, not as a boast but as a tribute. Every time they trained, they passed the photo of the kneeling woman with the rifle and nodded to it like a promise. That morning they prepared for a high-stress simulation, hostage extraction, full blackout conditions. Kade watched them suit up. No banter, no bragging. Just methodical preparation, straps tightened, optics checked, comms tested. He felt a quiet pride, the kind that didn't need words. "Remember," he said, pulling on his gloves, "we move like water, calm until impact." They nodded, and when the signal came, they flowed. The drill unfolded in silence. Not one unnecessary shout. Every motion deliberate. Every target cleared with precision. It wasn't perfect, but it was disciplined. And that, Kade knew, was the real victory. When the lights came back on, the instructor in the booth leaned into his mic. Team Base 7 completion time, 41 seconds. No casualties, clean run. No one cheered. They just exchanged glances, half smiles of mutual respect. They were living proof that noise wasn't the same as power. After the drill, Kade lingered behind, cleaning the weapons himself. He'd inherited that habit from her. To leave a tool dirty was to disrespect the work. As he wiped the last barrel, he noticed a small envelope tucked under the edge of the table. No name. Just one word, written in the same neat handwriting he'd seen once before. Zagreus. He froze. For a long moment, he didn't breathe. It wasn't possible. She'd vanished years ago. No contact, no trace. But the handwriting, the pressure of each letter was unmistakable. He looked around. The bay was empty. Outside, the sun was already setting, painting the walls in gold and shadow. He opened the envelope. Inside, a single sheet, coordinates, and a short note. Some ghosts don't rest until they're seen. If you want to understand, come see where silence began. No signature. None needed. He folded the note, slipped it into his pocket, and felt the pulse of a decision forming, the same quiet certainty she had once carried. 3 weeks later, his leave papers were approved. Officially, he was on rest and recovery. Unofficially, he was following a whisper across the world. The coordinates led him to a remote valley framed by jagged peaks, Zagros Mountains, northern frontier. The air was thin, the wind merciless. The kind of place that forgets names easily. A local guide led him halfway up, then stopped. No further, the man said. Old minefields, old ghosts. Kade smiled faintly. That's why I'm here. He climbed the rest alone. By sunset, he reached a flat ridge overlooking what had once been a forward operating post, now nothing more than twisted metal and weathered stone. He walked slowly, boots crunching gravel, until he saw it, a half-buried piece of rebar sticking out of the earth, wrapped in something that caught the light. He crouched. A dog tag. The name was faded but legible. Captjrmalone. The air went still. He remembered the name from her service record, her team leader, the one who died in her arms. And then he heard it, a voice behind him, soft, steady. I wondered how long it would take you. He turned. She stood there in a gray jacket and cargo pants, hair streaked with silver, face leaner but still calm. Anya Sharma. She looked exactly as he remembered, older, yes, but unbroken. He didn't speak, he couldn't. She stepped closer, her boots quiet against the gravel. I knew you'd come, she said. How, he finally managed. She shrugged lightly. You're predictable in the best ways. They stood in silence, the wind whispering through the wreckage around them. Then she gestured toward the dog tag. He was my the best leader I ever knew. Kade handed it to her. She held it in her palm like something sacred. He saved us, she said, took the blast so the rest could live. You were the only one who made it back. She nodded once. That's why I came back here, to remember correctly. He frowned. What do you mean? People turn the past into stories, she said quietly. They clean it up, make it noble, but the truth is it was chaos. I wasn't fearless. I was terrified. I just didn't let it stop me. She looked at him then, eyes clear. They call me a legend, but legends are just scars that healed in public. Kade said nothing. There was nothing to say. She knelt, set the tag on a small flat stone, and drew from her pocket a thin strip of cloth, the same patch from the photo, Delta insignia faded almost to gray. She tied it around the tag, anchoring it to the rock. Now, she said softly, he's home. For a long while, they stood together in the silence. No ceremony. No salute. Just wind and memory. Finally, she asked, why did you come? He thought for a moment before answering. To understand you. She smiled faintly. And what did you learn? He hesitated. That I was wrong about what strength looks like. She studied him, the way a teacher studies a final exam she already knows the grade for. You were never wrong, she said, just incomplete. Then softer, you've done well, Kade. He looked at her sharply. You kept track of me. I keep track of the people who listen, she said simply. As dusk fell, they built a small fire beside the ridge. The mountains faded into silhouette. She poured 2 cups of coffee from a battered thermos. He laughed quietly. Of course you brought coffee. She shrugged. Some habits keep you human. For a while they just sat there, 2 soldiers from different times, bound by one story neither of them had wanted to become legend. Finally he asked, why me? Why send that note? Because you reminded me of myself, she said, before I understood what the quiet was for. He frowned. What is it for? To protect what matters, she answered. Not your pride, not your image, the people beside you, the truth inside you. She sipped, then added, silence isn't empty, Kade. It's full of everything you've chosen not to waste. The fire cracked softly between them. He looked into the flames and realized she wasn't talking about war at all. The next morning she was gone. No note, no goodbye. Just the coffee thermos sitting where she'd been, and a fresh mark etched into the stone near Malone's tag. A single phrase. Let the work speak. He smiled, because now he understood. When he returned to Fort Hendricks, the first thing he did was gather his unit. No speech. No story. Just a drill, silent, methodical, deliberate. When it was done, one of his corporals asked, Sir, what was the point of that? Kade looked at him and said, so that when you're tired and scared and no one's watching, you still move with purpose. The corporal frowned. That's hard to remember. Kade nodded, then write it down. He walked to the bulletin board, took out a marker, and wrote 4 words across the bottom edge of the training schedule. Let the work speak. That phrase spread faster than he expected. Soon it appeared on notebooks, boot lockers, inside helmets. No one knew where it came from. They just knew it felt right. Thorne noticed it one morning during inspection. He traced the words with his finger, then looked at Kade. Yours. Kade shook his head. Hers. The general smiled. Of course it is. Months later, a courier delivered a package addressed to Fort Hendricks Command. No sender listed. Inside, a folded flag, a handwritten letter, and a single photo. A woman in a gray jacket standing beside a mountain memorial, the sky behind her streaked in gold. The letter was short. For the next generation, keep them humble, keep them ready, keep them human. Yes. Thorne read it twice before placing it beside the framed plaque on his wall. Then quietly he whispered, She's still building. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon, Kade walked through Bay 7 one last time before lights out. He stopped beneath the photo of her kneeling with the rifle, the caption gleaming under the fluorescent lights. He rested a hand on the wall. Thank you, he said softly. And in that quiet, he almost imagined her voice again, calm, distant, unyielding. Actions are what define you. He smiled, turned off the lights, and stepped into the dark. Outside, the wind carried the faint scent of rain over the base, the same storm smell that had followed her everywhere she went. The same promise that somewhere far away, she was still moving through the world, quietly holding the line. When theory meets the noise of real battle, what survives? For Sergeant Kade Jennings, the first real firefight came on a sun-bleached ridgeline 3,000 miles from everything familiar. No simulator hum, no instructor shouting corrections. Just wind, dust, and the distant percussion of small arms fire rolling like thunder through the valley below. He'd waited years for this deployment, a Fra province, a place the maps marked in beige but the soldiers spoke of in whispers. Advisory mission, they called it. But everyone knew what that meant, chaos with a handshake. He crouched behind a half-crumbled wall, scanning the hillside through the shimmer of heat. His squad, Bay 7 reborn, moved with quiet efficiency, the same rhythm they'd learned under fluorescent lights back at Hendricks. Calm until impact. Water through stone. Contact 200 meters east ridge, came the whisper over comms. Kade didn't flinch. Copy, hold position, breathe. The rookie beside him, Ortiz, trembled slightly. 19, first tour, eyes too wide for the landscape he'd just inherited. Kade reached over, steadying the young man's rifle. Slow your heart, he said softly. Don't fight the shake, use it, means you're alive. Ortiz nodded, exhaled, steadied. A single breath later, the world erupted, crack, snap, echo, bullets shredding the air above their heads. Rocks splintered, dust bloomed. Kade's voice stayed level. Two-shot burst. Don't chase noise, chase shadow. He peeked, saw movement, fired twice. The return fire ceased. Silence again, thick, tense, waiting. He'd been told that the first kill would change him. It didn't. It only confirmed something Anya Sharma had taught without saying it aloud. When you move with purpose, fear becomes focus. That night, after the firefight ended and the wounded were evacuated, Kade sat alone beside a flickering lantern. The desert stretched infinite around him, quiet, merciless, holy. He took a small folded paper from his breast pocket, the note she'd once sent, still asking, "Keep building." He read it under the lamplight until the letters blurred. Then he whispered into the dark, "I'm still building." The wind carried his words away. He hoped somehow they reached her. Back home, Fort Hendricks was changing again. General Thorne had retired. The new commandant, Brigadier Rhea Caldwell, had once been one of Anya's trainees in a Joint Ops exchange years earlier. Under her leadership, Hendricks became the blueprint for modern soldier development. She introduced something unheard of, the quiet leadership doctrine. No slogans. No hero worship. Just a single guiding line printed on every briefing folder. Competence is respect. Instructors were evaluated not by how loud their units responded, but by how well they adapted under silence. Training halls that once echoed with shouts now pulsed with focused rhythm, measured breath, controlled motion. Every recruit learned to move in the pattern Anya had embodied, precise, calm, inevitable. Some veterans scoffed. "Too soft," they said. "You can't fight wars with meditation." But the data silenced them. Reaction times improved, injuries decreased, mission success rates climbed. Quiet worked. Thousands of miles away, Kade's deployment stretched on. 6 months became 9. 9 became a year. The terrain changed, the villages blurred, but one truth followed him. The enemy wasn't always the man with a rifle, it was chaos itself. And the only countermeasure was discipline. One night during a joint patrol through a narrow village alley, his unit walked into an ambush. 3 corners, overlapping fire, 0 visibility. The kind of trap that ends careers or lives. Bullets snapped from rooftops, ricocheting off stone. Screams. Confusion. Then his training took over. Not the drills, not the orders. Her voice. Silence isn't empty. It's full of everything you've chosen not to waste. He dropped smoke, motioned hand signals, moved his team by instinct. No shouting. No panic. Just fluid motion through chaos. In 43 seconds, they'd repositioned, returned fire, and extracted with minimal casualties. When the dust cleared, the local commander stared at him in disbelief. "You didn't yell once," the man said. "How did they know what to do?" Kade just smiled. They listened before they ever learned to shoot. After the debrief, he found himself sitting outside the tent, adrenaline fatting into exhaustion. Ortiz sat beside him, shaking slightly, staring at his hands. "You did good," Kade said. "I almost froze." "You didn't," you breathed. Ortiz looked at him. "How do you stay that calm?" Kade thought for a moment. "I don't, I just remember someone who did." He pulled from his pocket a small laminated photo, the image from Hendricks, Anya kneeling mid-shot. He handed it over. Ortiz studied it. "Who is she?" Kade smiled. "The reason you're still alive." Back in Washington, bureaucrats were starting to notice Fort Hendricks. Reports stacked up, lower attrition rates, higher emotional resilience scores, fewer disciplinary actions. Someone in the Pentagon coined a phrase for it, the Sharma framework. It became doctrine across multiple branches within a year. Her lesson, once a quiet moment in a single training bay, was now rewriting how an entire generation prepared for war. And yet, the one person responsible had no idea. Anya lived quietly in a small coastal town now. She taught self-defense at a community center, mostly to women who'd never held a weapon. She spoke softly, moved deliberately, always reminding them that strength wasn't about striking. It was about balance. Every once in a while, a young soldier would recognize her. They'd hesitate, unsure if it was really her. She'd just smile. "Wrong person," she'd say. Then she'd return to correcting a student's stance. But one evening, as she locked the studio, a black SUV pulled up to the curb. A woman stepped out in uniform, decorated, composed. "Brigadier Caldwell." "Ma'am," she said, saluting, "we finally found you." Anya sighed softly. "You make it sound like I was hiding." "Were you?" Anya smiled, only from noise. Caldwell nodded. "Your doctrine's saving lives, Master Sergeant. We call it the Sharma framework." Anya's expression didn't change. "Call it whatever you like," she said. "Just make sure it works." "It does," Caldwell said. "Jennings proved that." At the name, something flickered in Anya's eyes. "He's still in?" "Yes, ma'am, leading now, field deployment. They say he's the calmest man in the fight." Anya looked toward the sea, the fatting orange light reflecting off the water. "He figured it out then." Caldwell smiled. "You trained him well." "I didn't train him," Anya said. "I reminded him of himself." 2 months later, the war zone changed again. Kade's unit received orders to provide overwatch during a civilian extraction. Routine on paper, nightmare in practice. Fog rolled thick across the valley. Comms dropped mid-mission. They were alone. And then came the explosion. An IED ripped through the lead convoy. Chaos surged, smoke, fire, screaming metal. Kade's vision blurred, ears ringing. He forced himself up, pain stabbing through his shoulder. He could barely hear Ortiz shouting for orders. Through the haze, he saw the civilians pinned behind a burning vehicle, rounds pinging off the chassis. Every instinct screamed to rush in. Every memory whispered, "Breathe first." He inhaled once. Exhaled slow. The world sharpened. He signaled hand commands, clear, precise. 2 soldiers flanked left, 1 right. Cover fire, movement, extraction. 38 seconds later, they were clear of the kill zone. When the medevac finally arrived, Kade sat on the edge of the transport, blood seeping through his sleeve, watching the civilians climb aboard. He felt no triumph, only the quiet hum of relief. Ortiz dropped beside him. "How did you know what to do?" Kade stared at the horizon. "I didn't," he said. "I just stopped needing to prove that I did." Weeks later, while recovering at the field hospital, a package arrived for him. No return label. Inside, a small, battered thermos and a folded note. "For the days when quiet feels heavy, the work still speaks. Eh?" He smiled despite the bandages. She'd found him again. Or maybe she'd never stopped watching. He poured coffee into a paper cup. It was cold by the time he finished it, but somehow it tasted perfect. Back at Fort Hendricks, Brigadier Caldwell held a briefing for incoming instructors. She stood beneath the plaque bearing Anya's words. Her tone was steady, commanding without force. "You'll hear a lot about tactics, about weapons, about technology," she said. "But what we teach here isn't a skill set, it's a state of being. We train them to survive themselves before they survive the battlefield." She pointed to the photo of the woman kneeling mid-shot. "This is our origin, one act of professionalism that redefined an entire culture. 31 seconds. Remember that every time you're tempted to raise your voice or inflate your ego." She paused, letting the silence fill the room. Then she smiled slightly. "Sometimes, the quietest sound in the world is competence." That night, under the same desert sky thousands of miles away, Kade lay awake on his cot, listening to the wind push through the tent seams. He took the thermos from his pack, turning it in his hands. The metal was scratched, dented, familiar. He closed his eyes and pictured her, the calm, the patience, the humanity behind the precision. He realized she hadn't taught him to shoot faster or think clearer. She taught him how to be still inside the storm. Outside, the night was vast, indifferent. But inside his chest, there was peace. He whispered into the dark. For her, for them, for the work. Then he slept deeply, silently, like a man who'd finally learned that peace isn't the absence of war. It's the mastery of oneself within it. What do you do when the noise finally stops? For Sergeant Kade Jennings, silence used to be peace. Now it was the hardest sound to live with. Home wasn't what he remembered. Streetlights hummed louder than mortar shells. Coffee shops felt like ambushes of laughter and perfume. Every sudden motion made his pulse spike before he realized he wasn't in a fray anymore. People said he looked good, fit, composed, heroic. He smiled, nodded, thanked them. Then he went home to an apartment that smelled of disinfectant and dust and sat awake until sunrise, staring at walls that didn't echo. He survived the deployment, but he wasn't sure what survival meant anymore. His first night back, he unpacked his duffel on the floor. Boots, uniform, the battered thermos. He turned it in his hands, thumb tracing the dent near the rim. The note she'd sent still lay inside, folded and faintly creased. For the days when quiet feels heavy, the work still speaks. He read it out loud, the words thin against the empty room. Then he whispered, "It's heavy tonight." Weeks passed. Routine tried to find him. Therapy appointments, debriefs, transition briefings filled with PowerPoint slides about reintegration. He nodded through them all. But the truth was simpler and harder. The battlefield had given him purpose, and peace had taken it away. He walked everywhere, city parks, river paths, old industrial streets, looking for something he couldn't name. Sometimes, he'd pass a recruitment poster with the phrase "Never assume" under the Fort Hendricks insignia. It made him smile and ache at once. Her fingerprints were everywhere now. The doctrine she never asked for had become a culture. Her silence had turned into policy. And yet the world still didn't know her name. One afternoon, he found himself standing outside a community center on the edge of town. A flyer in the window read, "Self-defense for women, balance, breath, awareness. Instructor, A.S." He froze. Could it be? He stepped inside. The sound of padded footsteps and measured breathing filled the small hall. Students moved in controlled rhythm, blocks, stances, turns. At the front stood a woman in a gray t-shirt, hair shorter now, streaked silver. She turned and smiled. "Late as usual," she said softly. He almost laughed. "You could have told me." "I did," she said. "I just didn't use a phone." After the class, they sat on a bench outside, watching the late autumn sun slip between the trees. "You didn't write again," he said. "I didn't need to," she replied. "You already knew what came next." He shook his head. "You disappeared again." "I retire better than most people fight," she said, half smiling. Then, after a pause, "How was it?" He looked down, loud, then quiet, too quiet. She studied him carefully. "You lost someone." "Not this time. That almost makes it worse." They sat in silence until he said, "I thought peace would feel lighter." "It doesn't," she said. "It just gives you time to notice the weight." They walked the pier afterward, the sea flat as steel under the dusk. Fishermen reeled lines in slow arcs. Gulls cut the air in tired circles. Anya stopped at the railing, staring out toward the horizon. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "Every day, and that's why I stay here." He frowned. That doesn't make sense. It does if you understand the difference between duty and identity, she said. The first ends when the mission does. The second takes longer to let go. He nodded slowly. I'm still learning that. You will, she said. Just don't rush the quiet, it's teaching you something. Later, they found a small cafe near the docks. The waitress poured them coffee without asking for orders. Anya stirred hers absently, eyes far away. You ever regret it? He asked. All of it. She took a breath. Regret is a luxury of people who think they had a choice. I had responsibility. There's a difference. He leaned back. You sound like you never stopped being a soldier. I didn't, she said softly. I just changed the battlefield. He smiled, teaching civilians. Teaching anyone who will listen. When they parted, she pressed something into his hand. A small metal pendant, plain, unpolished. On the back, engraved words. Steady, not still. He looked up, but she was already walking away down the pier, hands in pockets, blending into the evening crowd. Over the next few months, Kade began volunteering at veteran centers. Not as an instructor, just someone who listened. He learned that silence wasn't loneliness when it had purpose. It was space for other people's stories. He met men and women who carried the same invisible weight. The medic who couldn't sleep without hearing heart monitors. The translator who'd left her family behind. The sniper who quit shooting ranges because the echo felt too clean. He didn't offer advice. He just sat beside them, breathing slow, the way she'd taught him. Sometimes that was enough. Word spread. Soon the veterans called him the quiet sergeant. He didn't correct them. One evening, while cleaning the small memorial garden behind the center, he found a young recruit kneeling by the flagpole, crying silently. Kade didn't ask why. He just sat next to him, waited. Finally, the recruit whispered, I froze during my first exercise. Everyone saw, they laughed. Kade nodded. You remember how long you froze? The recruit wiped his face. Maybe 30 seconds. Kade smiled faintly. 31 changed my life. The recruit looked up, confused. Kade didn't explain. Some lessons, he thought, travel best in silence. Winter came. Snow layered the city in muted white. Kade spent most days at the center, teaching breathing drills to groups that slowly grew larger. Someone filmed one of his sessions and uploaded it. Within weeks, the clip spread through military forums. Comment after comment mentioned the same thing. He's teaching the Sharma method. This is from Fort Hendricks. He sounds like her. He ignored the noise. He wasn't chasing recognition. But one morning, a letter arrived with a seal he recognized, the Department of Defense. Inside, a short message. Sergeant Kade Jennings, you are hereby invited to represent the Quiet Leadership Program at the Global Defense Ethics Summit, Washington, D.C. He stared at it for a long time. Public speaking was the one battlefield he'd never prepared for. But something in him said go. The auditorium was vast, the lights blinding. Generals, policymakers, civilians, all waiting for him to speak about something that had no manual. When he stepped to the podium, he didn't open with credentials. He opened with a question. Why, he asked quietly, do we teach soldiers to shout louder than their fear instead of breathe through it? The room stilled. He told them about Fort Hendricks, about the transformation of a culture through silence. He didn't mention Anya by name until the end. There was a woman, he said, who taught me that strength isn't noise, it's precision, it's restraint, it's dignity under fire. He paused, letting the weight settle. She changed everything. 31 seconds at a firing range, that's all it took. The standard is the standard. The applause was long, standing, honest. Afterward, a young officer approached him backstage. Sir, she said, I trained under the Sharma framework. I wanted to say thank you. Kade smiled. Thank her, not me. The officer hesitated. Is she still alive? He looked toward the ceiling lights, as if they might answer. I think so, he said, somewhere. That night he returned to his hotel room, opened the curtains, and watched snow fall onto the city below. He made coffee in the battered thermos she'd given him. Steam rose like a small ghost. He whispered, we're still building. Somewhere out there he hoped she heard. Far away, in a quiet coastal town, Anya sat at her window reading the morning paper. A small headline at the bottom corner caught her eye. Veteran speaks on quiet leadership. Fort Hendricks doctrine now global standard. She smiled, folded the paper, looked out toward the sea. The sun broke through the clouds, gold on the water. She whispered, good, he listened. Then she stood, stretched, and walked to the community hall for another day of teaching. Different battlefield, same mission. Weeks later, a package arrived at Fort Hendricks. No sender, no note, just a single item inside. The pendant she, once given Kade, polished and re-engraved. Now it read, steady, not still, the work lives. The clerk didn't know who it was for, so they placed it on the memorial table beside the framed photo of her kneeling with the rifle. And for those who walked past it every day, the words became another quiet lesson. A reminder that some legacies don't shout their arrival, they breathe their way through generations. That evening, as snow melted into soft rain, Kade stood alone at the same pier where they'd last spoken. The sea was dark, endless, alive. He dropped a single cartridge casing into the water, a token from his last mission. It sank without a sound. He whispered, for all of us who learned to fight quietly. The wind shifted. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled, a slow, familiar echo. He smiled. When does a story truly end? When the mission, over, or when the lessons stop echoing? For years, soldiers came and went through Fort Hendricks, never knowing the full story behind the doctrine that shaped them. They only knew fragments, rumors of a woman whose silence changed everything, a soldier who followed her path, and a code that lived longer than both of them. They repeated her lines like prayer. Never assume. Let the work speak. Steady, not still. Most never knew her name. And that, perhaps, was how she would have wanted it. It had been 3 years since Sergeant Kade Jennings last saw her. 3 years since the pier, since the pendant, since her quiet disappearance back into the world. He was a captain now, reluctantly promoted, quietly respected. The kind of leader who never raised his voice, but whose soldiers moved before he spoke. Under his command, the 73rd Advisory Group had one of the highest cohesion rates in active service. No slogans, no egos, just discipline, empathy, and the kind of calm that spreads through a unit like oxygen. When the new recruits asked about his secret, he'd smile and say, "It's not mine, it's borrowed." One morning, his calm officer entered the briefing room holding an envelope. "Sir, this came through courier priority, no return address." Kade's pulse stuttered as he saw the handwriting, elegant, deliberate, unmistakable. He opened it carefully, half afraid the ink might fade if he breathed too hard. "If you're reading this, I'm already gone." Not in the tragic way, just in the way that people like us fade quietly between chapters. "You've done more than I ever did, Kade. You built the kind of silence that heals instead of hides. Keep building it. And remember, peace isn't given, it's practiced." Lay. He folded the letter slowly, pressing it between his palms. No tears came, just a deep, wordless ache that settled somewhere beneath his ribs. He didn't know if gone meant she died or simply vanished again. Either way, he understood. She'd never belonged to one place for long. Her work lived wherever quiet was needed. 2 months later, During a multinational exercise in Norway, Kade was invited to speak to a group of foreign officers about the quiet leadership doctrine. They expected tactics, data, structure. He gave them something else. Silence, he began, isn't the absence of sound, it's the presence of control. He paused, letting the translators catch up. When you stop shouting, you start hearing what matters. Your team's breath, your own pulse, the truth behind fear. He told them about Fort Hendricks, about her lesson, about how 31 seconds had become a global philosophy. He didn't dramatize it. He didn't embellish. He just spoke softly, truthfully. By the time he finished, the room was silent, not out of awe but out of understanding. And that, he thought, was the only applause that ever mattered. That evening, as snow fell thick outside the base, Kade stood by the window with a cup of coffee, the last of the beans he'd kept in her old thermos. He'd cleaned it so many times the engraving had faded to a faint shimmer. He whispered, still building. Then he smiled. Meanwhile, halfway across the world, in a windswept town along a forgotten coast, a woman sat at her kitchen table writing letters she would never send. Anya's hair had gone almost white now, her hands slower but steady. The walls of her small home were bare except for one frame, a photograph of a much younger man holding a rifle, calm eyes focused on something just out of sight. Beneath it, engraved words. The standard is the standard. She smiled every time she looked at it. He'd found his way. That was enough. Her body wasn't failing her yet, but her energy had shifted inward. She no longer needed to prove anything, not to anyone, not even herself. Some mornings she walked the shoreline, tracing the surf line with her boots. She'd stop, close her eyes, breathe in the salt air and listen. The sea sounded like gunfire and forgiveness all at once. Back at Fort Hendricks, the new generation carried the torch without even realizing it. Cadets were taught breathing techniques before weapons handling. They studied psychological stability before marksmanship. The slogan, "Calm until impact," became a universal mantra. Even the graduation oath changed. At the end of training, each recruit raised their right hand and repeated the closing line of the quiet doctrine. May my silence be strength, and my strength be mercy. It became tradition. And though her name was rarely spoken, her spirit was everywhere, woven into the DNA of every soldier who learned to fight without hatred and lead without noise. Kade returned to Fort Hendricks one final time, years later, as a guest speaker. The base looked different, modernized, expanded, but one thing hadn't changed: the photo in Training Bay 7. He stood before it in the early morning light, hands clasped behind his back. The caption still gleamed under the protective glass. Master Sergeant Anya Sharma, 31 seconds. The standard is the standard. He studied her face for a long while. There were things he wanted to say, things he'd never said. But he knew she didn't need words. She'd always understood what silence meant. He whispered anyway. "Thank you for teaching me how to stay human." Then he turned, stepped into the sunlight, and smiled as he saw a new generation lining up on the range, young, eager, focused. None of them would ever know what this photo meant in full. But every one of them would live by it. And that, he thought, was legacy. That evening, as he prepared to leave the base, a lieutenant stopped him near the gate. "Sir, there's something for you." She handed him a small package, wrapped in brown paper, postmarked from a coastal town with no name. Inside, an old compass, brass worn smooth from years of use. The needle still worked, steady and true. Under the lid, 3 words were carved: "Peace in motion." He held it to his chest, eyes closing against the wind. For a moment, he thought he smelled coffee and salt air. Then he smiled, knowing. She was gone, yes. But she hadn't disappeared. She'd simply return to the place where all purpose begins, quietly, without applause. Months later, Kade was invited to a memorial dedication at Arlington. A small, unassuming stone among thousands. No rank, no title. Just her name. Anya Sharma, 1977, 2045. Dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. He stood before it in dress uniform, rain falling steady across the rows. He didn't bring flowers. He just stood there, hand on the stone, letting the silence do what it always did, say more than he could. He whispered, "You kept your promise, the work still speaks." Then he turned, walking away into the rain, upright, calm, steady, carrying her lesson into whatever came next. Years passed. The military evolved further. Automation, drones, politics. But within it all, there remained an unspoken rule among the soldiers who knew the lineage of their training. When things go wrong, when fear takes over, when chaos closes in. Breathe, move, act. No shouting. No panic. Just purpose. Somewhere in every base across the world, her phrases lingered, scratched on helmets, carved into tables, whispered during deployment. Not as worship, as guidance. Because her philosophy wasn't about war at all. It was about how to live. One night, decades later, a young cadet stood in Bay 7, cleaning her rifle after her final test. The walls were lined with holographic plaques now, but one corner still held a printed photo, yellowed and fading. She read the caption aloud softly. Master Sergeant Anya Sharma, 31 seconds. Then she looked closer, saw another photo pinned beside it. A man standing at attention, inscription beneath. Captain Kade Jennings, the work lives. The cadet smiled. She didn't know their stories, but she could feel them. The quiet, the purpose, the weight behind every calm breath. She holstered her weapon, straightened her shoulders, and whispered what every generation since them had whispered before stepping into their own storms. May my silence be strength, and my strength be mercy. Then she turned off the lights and walked out. And the room, once filled with arrogance and laughter years ago, settled again into the still, holy kind of quiet that only dignity can leave behind. Because in the end, the legacy wasn't the shot. It wasn't the medals or the doctrine or even the name etched into stone. It was the moment when arrogance gave way to humility, when noise surrendered to understanding. The kind of change no explosion can cause. Only silence can. And though time would erase faces and voices, the truth remained, simple and eternal. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.